Now, to present the survey, who better than Professor Peter Beele from FIRA? Peter is a member of the FIRA Council and responsible for overseeing technical services there. He has a broad technical expertise and understands business developments and dynamics. Specialist areas include competitiveness, statistics, supply chain, product certification, EU timber regs, exports, wood technology, carbon footprinting, lean manufacturing, and environmental legislation. And he's quite good on training education as well. So without more ado, Pete, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for that kind introduction, Paul. Blimey, that's a lot of skills. I don't believe that I've got them in reality, but a jack of all trades, I think, rather than a master of any of them. Anyway, it's my job, as Paul said, to go through some of the results of the survey that was carried out over the last 9 months now. We've been working on it. And as far as the survey went, there were probably something like about 35 detailed questions that went out in an e-survey. I don't actually plan to go line by line through each of those questions and give you all the answers, because I suspect that that would send at least 3/4 of you comatose, and the quarter of you who remained awake would actually be screaming to get away, and even to the extent that you'd miss your lunch. So what I'm going to try and do is to go through some of the conclusions of the report and use some of the evidence that was collected to back up those conclusions. Okay, so the survey's questions actually sought to elicit answers that addressed the issues that are up on the slide there. I think as David already pointed out, this survey wasn't just about apprenticeships, it's about the wider skills agenda. It's about schools, it's about colleges, training providers, universities, private organisations, and it's talking about qualifications, degrees, contemporary issues in terms of training. It was a very broad survey covering a wide range. And also, I think David sort of hinted at why now is a really good time to start looking at training and skills as far as the industry is concerned. As Paul said, I've got a bit of a statistics hat on at times, and if you look at the UK furniture manufacturing industry, since 2011, output has actually gone up by 11% in terms of turnover. Now, that might not seem a lot, but bearing in mind that we've come from a recession in 2008, the furniture industry itself has recovered maybe better than some other manufacturing sectors, and that's something that we should be proud of. I think one of the problems has been, though, that in 2008, there was a lot of retrenching going on. There was little investment in people, and there was certainly probably not that much investment in capital. And so what's kind of happened is I think that this improvement, this 11% improvement, has maybe caught a few of us by surprise. And what's happened, I believe anyway, is that actually we now really don't have the skills in a lot of our companies that we need in order to take advantage of what obviously is a period of small growth. I wouldn't say massive growth, but small growth. And I think things are looking fairly optimistic for 2015. And I won't know that until the figures come out, and also 2016 as well. So we're on the up, I think, as far as an industry is concerned. If you look at retail figures, that's also on the up as well. People are buying more home furnishings. So now is the time to start looking at the skills agenda and trying to get ourselves set up, if you like, for the opportunities that I think exist into the future. I'll go a little bit through the method because I think it's important so that you understand exactly where we were coming from. As has already been said, there were 173 responses to the survey, which isn't massive, bearing in mind we're an industry of about 8,000 companies, but equally it's not bad. Those of you who carry out surveys will know sometimes how hard it is to get information. In terms of those responses, then 96 manufacturers and 33 retailers fully completed the questionnaire. There was an option to complete little bits of it, But as I say, there was quite a significant number fully completed the questionnaire. And we wanted to make sure that what happened represented the sector as a whole. So in terms of manufacturing, then there were about 51% from the domestic subsector, 13% from office, and the remainder from contract, which actually reflects, I believe, very roughly what the turnover of those sectors is at the moment. Moving on, in terms of retail, it's no surprise that actually the domestic side of the business was represented slightly more than manufacturers, with 61% there. We also asked people who answered the questionnaire about obviously where they were located, the sort of products that they looked at, and their turnovers. And in general, in terms of product, we had a very wide product mix. In terms of location, we had answers from all around the country. There were a few areas that liked a few more. But in general, those were representing industry as well. The only slight skew, I would say, as far as the survey is concerned, and that's something that will come out later, was that we probably had more larger turnover companies responding to the survey than the very, very small sort of 1 to 4 businesses. And so that skewed it slightly in that, you know, in our industry, probably 90%, more than 90% are very, very small companies, and only a very small percentage of companies are large. But having said that, the large companies employ a lot of people, and they're big and strong enough to influence the skills agenda. So I think that's quite important that we've got their involvement and their buy-in. I think, as has already been mentioned, it was clear from the survey, from interviews, and we interviewed about 60 different individuals from companies. So there's quite a lot of interviewing going on, because whilst you can collect quantitative evidence, anecdotal evidence is really important to sort of inform what's going on. And all of the people hinted that they felt that schools engagement was an incredibly important element of the equation, and not just schools as well, engagement with colleges and universities. Now, if we look at the graph there, and I have a sort of pointy thing on here if it actually works, it looks like, as far as manufacturing is concerned, and retail, 70% of companies are actually actively engaging with local training providers. With schools, 35% of manufacturers, but retailers aren't that keen. Retailers seem to be more keen with engagement with local universities. And that all looks very healthy, doesn't it? You know, we're saying, oh, blimey, 70% of companies are engaging with their local training providers, so we've not got a problem. Statistics don't always show what's really happening. And those percentages there were the percent of companies who actually responded to the question. In reality, probably less than half of all the companies who answered the questionnaire responded to this. So the question I have in my mind is, well, why didn't the other 50% respond? I suspect they didn't respond because they're not engaging. So whilst things look good on the picture, in reality, I suspect that there's a lot more companies not engaging at a local level than maybe initially thought, as far as the survey goes. And why do we think school engagement is so important? We've already covered some of those issues, but as far as I'm concerned, I think there's kind of a logical story there. At the moment, unemployment figures are falling. They've been falling, fluctuating a little bit, but over the last sort of 4 years, they have been falling. So that means that there's much less of a pool for everybody to choose from in terms of the people who are left. And if we can engage at the very early stages with these people, local schools particularly, but also colleges as well, then we have the opportunity to influence them. We have the opportunity to make them think that furniture is a good thing, it's a good place to be. And that means that if we do that, we get the better individuals from the pool of people that are there. If we don't engage with them and we just take whoever we can, inevitably we're going to end up with people who are more the leftovers. And I know that's a bit cruel, and it might not be a very political thing to say in an educational environment, but it's actually true. If you want the best, you've got to engage with them, and if you want the people to come to you first, you've got to get them. And so I believe that relationships with schools are extremely important, as the survey also indicated. The next area really is looking at skills gaps. And we asked about all sorts of different potential jobs that could be done. In order to run the furniture manufacturing industry or a retail industry, effectively you have to cover all sorts of different roles, whether it's upholstery or going all the way through to, take my specs off, IT, finance and languages. But the important thing really is that we can't ever hope as an industry to address all those jobs. It's an impossible task to do over the short term. We have to start focusing on those areas that are going to make the biggest difference. And so if we were to do that, we can focus in on the end there. And as I say, it's quite a complex slide, but effectively where you see a yellow or a red tower block, then those are the areas where industry is indicating that there's a shortage. And over on the left-hand side there, those are where the bigger shortages are. So in terms of general issues such as IT and such as selling and office administration, people can find those sort of people in general. But it's these areas on the left-hand side that are most important. And if we were to focus in on those, then the results showed that actually upholstery and sewing were clearly a big problem for people. They still are. Finishing and polishing as well. And as I say, I don't need to read through, but those are sort of the key areas. And certainly things like production management are interesting because that's something that again will come up later. In terms of retail, the answers were relatively similar because furniture retailers, again, they can get people who can kind of do the general stuff that a retailer does, but what they can't find are specialists. They can't find people who've got furniture technical skills. They can't find people with factory and production experience. And also similar to, though not on this graph, similar to manufacturers and some of the other areas where slightly smaller skills problems were identified, things like CAD/CAM expertise were identified as being important, and also furniture design did come in there. But those are the areas that maybe we should be focusing on. Leave the rest to it. Let's really see if we can get those skills gaps sorted. And what happens if we don't? Well, we asked people what the effect of skill shortages were on them at the moment. And I think that graph is pretty telling in that 43% of companies indicated that there was some sort of output effect by having a skills shortage. But actually 16% said that they've had a significant loss in business because they can't find people with the right skills. So if we're an industry working in that environment where actually something like about nearly 60% of our organisations are feeling that they're not performing as well as they could be, just imagine if we had all the people with the right skill sets, just imagine how successful we'd be then. That 11% increase going from 2011 to 2014 would be significantly better. There's been a lot of discussion about quality of provision, and again, I think the providers and the colleges, etc., will be rather sensitive about this kind of area as well, but we had to ask the question, we had to work out what really was going on. Are we getting people with the right skills? And actually, when you ask these sorts of questions, you've always got to be careful in a survey, because what will happen in a survey is that if you give people a chance to complain, by golly will they complain. Of course they'll complain. They'll say that everything's absolute rubbish. Now, actually, in reality, we were quite surprised by these results because, in general, in terms of sorry, clicked the wrong thing. In terms of furniture-specific training, if we look at the graph there, and we look that actually, even in the worst-case scenarios, at least half-ish of people are adequately happy with the provision. The quality of the provision, or they think that the provision has been supplied particularly well. There's a bit of an area around apprenticeships where there's something to look at. But as I say, we have to put this into context. People will complain if they have the opportunity to do so. And I believe that actually that shows that, in general, the quality of provision, I hate to use this word, is okay, okay-ish. But surely what we can do is we can move that so that the quality of provision moves from okay to really good or to excellent. We can't ever sit on our laurels, and I think there's there's ways to move forward. We also asked the same question about non-furniture specific training, and the results were fairly similar. There were slight differences, but I don't really have time to go into that today. I said it's not all about apprenticeships, but apprenticeships are massive on the agenda. And we wanted to understand from industry what their feelings about apprenticeships were. And there's quite a lot of detail, again, which I can't go into today, but we look at some of the baseline figures. And in terms of furniture manufacturers, then we actually had 34% of the people who responded saying that they employ apprentices. And again, that's another of those statistics that looks absolutely brilliant. That's great. Oh, well, we could do with more, but actually it's a good start. A third of our industry is employing apprentices. But actually, when you look at it, that's not the case. Because if you look at the baseline figures, and thanks to Andy from ProSkills and people like that, I think roughly at the moment we're taking on about, 400 apprentices a year? Something along those lines. We have 8,000 furniture and furnishings manufacturing companies. So if you do the math, as they say in American, then actually that percentage is a much lower percentage than the results. I think partly these are skewed, number one, because, as I said before, we dealt with a lot of larger companies who are better geared and better able to take on apprentices. And also, the other thing is, we actually got answers back to the survey from people who actually have a genuine interest in training and skills, and so I suspect that there's a bit of a bias there as far as the results go. But putting that question into context, and we were asking questions about the future as well, so moving forward, we did actually ask the question, would you consider taking on an apprentice next year? And moving from that sort of, as I say, just flick back quickly, moving from that number of 34% saying they currently employ at the moment, we're actually then getting to something like 61% saying they would consider taking on an apprentice next year. That's not in 5 years' time, that's actually next year. And I think that a lot of that is based on a couple of things. It's certainly, I think, based on the fact that despite our different opinions of how well government are dealing with training provision and funding of it, they are pushing apprentices big time, and they've made that public in all sorts of ways. But also, our industry itself is making huge strides as far as apprenticeships go, and I've got Mick and Carl here from the Trailblazers, and that term's been used, and those of you within the know will know exactly what trailblazing is, but trailblazing is in effect, it's a group of volunteers from companies who have said, we'll stand up, we will stand up, put our heads above the parapet, sit down together, work out what industry needs in terms of apprenticeships, and we'll come up with apprenticeships that mean something. And I think that there's a momentum gathering as far as that goes, but there's still more to be done. And so the Trailblazers are beginning to make a huge difference, and I suspect that probably has influenced the result there. Retailers, and when I use the term retailers, we're talking about retailers, distributors and importers, but I can't keep saying that every time I mention them. But so using the term broadly, retailers really are much less interested in apprenticeships. I don't know why, we didn't find out why in the survey, but I suspect they can probably find the people that they want. They probably do a lot more in-house training specific to their particular brand. So they seem much less interested in apprentices. Something like about 71% say that they currently don't need apprentices. But even retailers are are attaching themselves to the bandwagon in that 42% would actually consider taking on an apprentice next year. So it looks like there are apprenticeships coming on board that mean something to retailers as well. We talked before about the fact that it's all to do with the wider skills agenda. It's not just apprentices. And one of the questions we asked was of manufacturers and of retailers. We said, well, who do you employ? Who would you prefer to employ? And actually the answer that came up was that most people would go for people who were 25 years plus They'd prefer them with experience, but even if they didn't have experience, they were almost opting for people who were of that sort of age. And in that scenario, then apprenticeships don't necessarily apply. I say don't necessarily, they don't actually apply. But maybe we should consider whether there is room to use the sort of apprenticeship type skills and courses and qualifications to train these older individuals who don't actually have to have an apprenticeship as such, but we should be sharing all the knowledge that we're gathering. And so we need to look at those sort of courses that will assist these 25 years plus people. We need to look at other areas. We need to look at more contemporary training so that these people are covering things like legislation and technical and business support services. So there's a lot to look at on the wider skills agenda. It's not just all about apprenticeships. I go back, location. That's something that's incredibly important. And it's not all about having a nice office overlooking the city. It's actually more about where you are around the country and how easy it is for you to fulfill your skills agenda. One thing that, and I'm guilty of this in some respects, one thing that is said is that we don't really have any geographical hub as far as the furniture industry in the UK is concerned. And certainly as far as England's concerned, if we look at the figures there, in general, most areas have roughly the same number of companies. There's a few more in the southeast. And the northeast doesn't seem to have very many at all. And then Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, again, relatively small numbers. It's quite a complex graphic again, but starting from the bottom, the blue line says that those are the number of companies around who have 0 to 4 employees. So you can see, as we talked about before, as far as the industry is concerned, we have lots and lots of blue there, lots and lots of very, very small companies. And as you move up, then I don't need to go through that now. You can see that as you move up, as you go up each of the columns, these represent slightly larger companies, all the way up to the top. That the little pale blue line represents companies who employ 250 plus people. So saying that we've got this even spread throughout the country is rather nice, and it's an easy way to explain things. But actually, when you start looking at the larger companies in a little bit more detail, one thing that stood out for me, for example, was that where you've got these multicoloured bands where we're getting to the larger companies, particularly for the North West and Yorkshire and the Humber, there's a much higher percentage of larger companies in that area than there are, for example, in the South East and in London, where traditionally we're saying, well, we've got a lot of companies there, but actually they're not necessarily the larger companies. And it's no surprise to me, therefore, that in the North West and Yorkshire and the Humber, and if Stephen McPartland was here from government, he would love me to say this, the Northern Powerhouse, which is the new government speak for up there. Remember it, you'll hear it time and time again. The Northern Powerhouse there, it's no surprise to me that that's where trailblazing started, because there's more of if you like, there's more of a little grouping or a cluster, if you like, of people in the furniture industry. So going from what I thought initially was an industry where we don't have clusters, we actually do. But we've got a lot to learn from those sorts of areas. I think also, as far as location is concerned, there are other issues. It's not all about which companies or where, but there are certainly some areas in the country where unemployment is comparatively low compared to other areas, where there is a greater tendency maybe for people to go on to further education rather than wanting to go into industry. Certainly rural areas, I think, pose problems if we're in small towns in predominantly rural areas compared to if you're in a city. And in those situations, there's maybe not as many local training providers. So there are challenges for people depending on their location around the country, and that's something that we need to try and resolve. I think if we can collectively arrive at innovative solutions to service those location problems, then I think we're taking huge steps as far as the industry is concerned. Recruitment and training culture was another area, and this is something I know that Carl's going to talk a little bit more later. But one of the things that we did ask was about the people that manufacturers and retailers employed, because anecdotally we'd heard people going, "Oh, the youngsters, the UK youngsters today, they don't know how to work. They don't know, they can't get up in the morning," and that seemed to be sort of pervading throughout discussions that you heard. In reality, when you did the quantitative analysis and asked people what they thought, actually that wasn't an issue at all. A few people said that there was a bit of a problem, but in general, that's not what the situation is. So young people, they do want to work, young UK people do want to work. I think one of the biggest problems that was identified was that it was difficult to recruit people in certain areas, but not only difficult to recruit, it was always also really hard to hold on to the people that you'd recruited. There are people here I know, and I'm not looking specifically at anybody because it's all confidential, but they've actually had people in their business, they've recruited, and within a couple of weeks they've lost them again, which doesn't help the business at all. It doesn't move things forward. So that begins to hint, well, is it all about those youngsters, or is it maybe about us as a manufacturing and a retail industry? Do we know how to cope with these youngsters? Do we know how to employ them? Do we know how to look after them? I think there are special skills required, and quite often, and I know I'm in that situation sort of as a manager, my skills for dealing with people of that particular age bracket are not good. So I think there's a lot to be learned maybe from how we recruit and how we retain youngsters in our businesses. And enthusiasm, I think, is one of the keys. If you're not enthusiastic, there's no way that those people are going to stay with you. And that's, again, one of the worrying things as far as the statistics go here, in that, you ask people how exciting or attractive is your business to young people, or do you find it attractive or exciting? And actually, 50% of us are saying, no, we don't think it is. 25% of us actually don't even know whether it is or not, which is quite surprising. And only 27% of us as manufacturers think that it's somewhere that people really, really should be going. Now again, statistics and all the rest, but I would love to have seen it a little bit better than that, because it is an exciting industry. We just somehow have to get that enthusiastic message over, and that's going back to the issue about schools and colleges and all the rest. We need to engage with those people and say, look, it's not all about working in a sweatshop. Coming to work for the furniture industry, there's all sorts of exciting things there. We have robots, we have design, we have really good factories that we can work in. There's all sorts of things that can be done. And actually it's interesting, if you talk to a lot of youngsters and you talk to people from school, they're not that bothered about going into retail. I actually think retail's quite interesting. So retailers have a much more positive approach in terms of the attractiveness of their business. And you only need to see that when you go into big retailers and you see what they're doing now in terms of just the way they display furniture. It's so much better than it ever was even 5-10 years ago. Another area that was questioned again in terms of recruitment, we talked about the issue of and again looking for a politically correct way of saying it, non-UK resident labour, and whether that was impacting massively on the industry. In fact, the number of companies who responded and said they used a lot of labour of that kind was relatively small. But those who did, they said that it was good because it did help to bridge the skills gaps that they had. But also, a number of people said that it's bad, and I guess, I don't know, there's a sort of football or rugby analogy to be had here, in that if you keep importing talent, then you'll never ever have any homegrown talent. And so we need to focus on maybe a bit more of the homegrown talent. The other challenges, again, with dealing with as I say, sort of non-UK resident labour, are that there are a whole new set of training challenges in that there are language issues and there are cultural issues that have to be dealt with. So actually, whilst there are advantages in terms of bridging immediate skills gaps, then overall there are more complexities involved as far as that side of the business goes. The ageing workforce is something that I think a lot of manufacturing industries are having to cope with, and I think in the furniture manufacturing industry that's no different. And whilst these figures are slightly different from the ones that you would get if you did a national labour survey, and those figures are actually in the report that you'll be able to pore over on the train on the way home, the industry itself is saying that they feel that the workforce is going to age over the next few years. So as far as manufacturing industry goes, they reckon that the average age now, or most people reckon the average age is about 31 to 40, but they feel that in 5 years' time, then it's going to be between 41 and 50, and also they feel that there's going to be a lot more people in the 50 to 60 age bracket and in the 60 plus age bracket. I think that's probably fair, and I suspect that's probably also being driven by the fact that there's no retirement age anymore. The retirement age has been removed, so that's bound to actually have an impact on predictions in terms of the average age of a workforce. The problem is, at the moment, we can kind of cope with that skew, but if that skew keeps pushing over and over and over, what's going to happen is that we're going to get to 80 and we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of employees and they're all going to drop dead and we're going to have no skills at all left at the other end. So we'll have lots of youngsters running around with no skills and the industry will fail. So we do need to take positive actions in order to ensure that we can not let that skew get too far the wrong way. As far as retail is concerned, then again there is a skew, but they feel that they have a much younger workforce on average, and I suspect that probably is true if you were to look at things. I think finally, in terms of the gaps that are there, Paul's already mentioned the British Furniture Confederation and the way that it's geared up to talk with government. Not only MPs but also Whitehall. We need to do a lot more of that. We need to have a much more coordinated approach as far as those conversations go, and we need to represent our multidisciplinary sector to government. We need to make sure, in reality, that we have this regular dialogue that ensures that any national skills and training strategies are going to impact positively on us and won't impact negatively. Now, we know that there's less money around at the moment, and we know the challenges that are being faced, certainly by a lot of the providers and educational establishments. It's our job to try and keep nudging back at government and making sure that we do the best that we possibly can as far as the industry is concerned. So, I believe I've stuck to my half an hour, Paul, which is not bad. In summary, and very brief summary, those are the gaps, so we need to look at some of the actions. I've covered everything in a very short time. A lot of what I've said is common sense, but I think it needed to be done. We needed to quantify what was going on in order that we can then move forward and we can inform future strategies and initiatives. A lot of what's been suggested and a lot of these sort of summary items I think are happening already. I feel that there's a momentum beginning to start, and this is, if you like, 20%, 25% of the way through this skills and training development momentum, and I think it'll give it another kick. And so we need to start thinking about skills engagement policy. There's some great things being done here by the Worshipful Company and by Make It, but it's not massively coordinated. We sat at, this is something I think that Carl and Mick will remember when we were sat at DFS and we were talking about our industry, and everyone was going, oh, we've got great videos that show what happens in our factories and what we do and all the rest. Schools don't see it. We see it. We show our customers, oh, this is what our company does. But we have this huge resource of information that we could use. We just need to coordinate it and get it out to the schools. And I think we need a defined policy of some sort in order to do that. We need to clarify what the skills provision requirements are. We need to know what's available. Why would a company have to really search to find out the sort of qualifications that they need? Why can't they just go somewhere straight away, pick up the phone, ring one person and say, this is exactly what I need to do, can you help me? That person says, yeah, of course, this is how you do it, you go to it. Well, I'll sort it out for you, because what I'll do is I'll coordinate it with X and Y, and then everything will happen. I think for a lot of companies, anecdotally again from the answers, a lot of them said, I don't know where to find apprentices, I don't know how to deal with it, I don't understand it. We all think that we understand it. We're in an area where we kind of do, but we need to get them to understand it more. The training providers, they're doing okay-ish, but that's what the survey says. They'll smile and they'll kick me over lunch, I know, but actually they're doing okay-ish, but there is more to be done, more coordination as far as that goes. We've got the regional problems I talked about before. There must be initiatives we can start that would overcome some of those regional initiatives. Can we share staff in companies? Oh, I don't want to share my staff, but could you share staff? Could you share training space in your companies? There's lots of sort of sharing opportunities. Do my students always have to go to the college? Can't the college come to my students? What are the distance learning opportunities? We need to look at all those as potential ways forward. The resource sharing particularly is important. Best practice is something that came up, and that's why we've got a special section particularly for this occasion today, where we're going to talk about best practice. There are some companies out there who are doing things brilliantly. You're going to hear from Carl shortly in terms of recruitment and retaining staff and the things that he does over there at Senator. Superb best practice. We can learn from each other, and we should be learning more. And finally, and I think probably one of the hardest things of all, is industry engagement. This is a great start. How many people have we got here? 60, 70 people sat in a room. But I think what we really need to do is to stimulate a bit of a cultural shift as far as training and skills development is concerned. What we need to do is actually move it to the top of our agenda when it comes to strategy and business planning, and not do the business planning and the strategy first and then say, right, now we'll sort out the skills and training bit at the end. We need to move it up the agenda. That's me done, thank you.